Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today, we're looking at Durch, dein, Gefängnis, Sohn, which translates to through your imprisonment, Son of God. This is a pretty interesting chorale, especially the last system here. It's relatively short, and the beginning of the chorale really doesn't have too much to mention, so we're just going to hop right into the analysis. We have 4 sharps in the key signature. We start with E major, we end with E major. I reckon we're in the key of E major. We have some passing tones, one in the tenor and one in the melody, before we get E, B, E, and G sharp. It's another E major chord, no need to reanalyze. We then have C sharp, E, and A, which is A major over C sharp. That is a 4 chord in first inversion. And then we get an interesting chord here, G sharp, D, E, and B. We saw a similar chord used in yesterday's episode as well, where instead of going to the tonic, we went to the tonic with a minor 7th, which turns into 5 of 4, or more specifically 5, 6, 5 of 4. So we're seeing the tonic triad recontextualized as a dominant 7 chord, as opposed to being its own tonic triad, which is how we would expect it, especially after a 4-6 chord. But we get another A major triad on the other side of it, though, with a catch. We have C sharp, and E here, but we also have a B here in the melody. So what I think actually is happening here is we're getting it's kind of interesting what's happening here. I'm going to go ahead and make the argument that this is another 4-6 chord, but this B is like a 9/8 suspension over the bass that does resolve down by step in the next measure. However, the bass does change, so we don't get the 9/8 resolution, but the suspension still more or less functions the same. So my argument is that this is a 4-6 chord without the root. There is no A in this voicing, and this B is a neighbor tone however you look at it. But, or no, that B would be that B is a neighbor tone if you look at it this way. However, if we were looking at this chord literally, this would be some type of 6 chord, or 6-7 without the 5th, and that's totally fine. E7 going to C sharp minor would not be really a deceptive progression of any sorts, just because of the fact that E going to C sharp minor, that wouldn't be a deceptive progression in any key. So this isn't a secondary deceptive progression really in the traditional sense. This would be like the 5 chord going to a 3 chord in the key of A major. So actually in that sense it is a little deceptive, but it's not a textbook deceptive progression which states that 5 is going to 6, which is a progression that we see in Bach from time to time. However, in this case, we have 5 going to 3 in terms of A major, and I'll go ahead and write that as some secondary analysis. This would just be 5, 6, 5 in terms of A, and this would be 3, 7 in terms of A as well. So like a secondary or like a mid-tier deceptive progression, a variation on a deceptive progression perhaps, but an interesting progression nonetheless. This still sounds like an A major chord to me with a suspension. That melody sounds like it is suspended. There's nothing really that can be said to change my mind on that one. But regardless, we go from our ambiguous chord here to F sharp, C sharp, E, and A. I think this E is also functioning like a suspension, like a 7/6 over the bass. So this D sharp would be our chord tone. We have D sharp, F sharp, A, and C sharp, which would be a 7 chord, a 7/7 chord in first inversion, so 7, 6, 5. Or I guess if you look at this E as our chord tone, this could be like a, let's see, F sharp minor 7 chord in root position, so like a 2/7 chord. Whether this is 7 or whether this is 2, again, another case. If you've watched any of my past videos, you know that 7 and 2 are often paired together and when you see them, it's usually one voice that is stepwise motion apart across the beat that makes it difficult to discern what exactly the chord's identity is. Do we have 7 or 2 here, or is it both 7 and 2? I think any analysis for the sake of getting the point across is accurate, but to me, I think this is functioning more like a 7 chord, and also kind of strengthens my analysis that this is more like a 4 chord than anything else with this very strange suspension. But regardless, whether this is 7 or 2, we do have a tonic triad here, G sharp, B, E, and G sharp. That's our E major chord in first inversion with a passing tone in the bass, and then our half cadence here is concluded with 5, B, B, D sharp, and F sharp. That's B major, which is our 5 chord. Okay, looking ahead, our phrase doesn't end with a fermata. Checked 2 versions, there's no fermata. So there's like a quasi-cadence here, though. I'm going to call it a perfect authentic cadence because the phrase does end, even though the fermata is not written in. It would be an unusual coincidence if I checked 2 versions and both of them omitted the fermata, and that's just a typo. And if that's the case, I apologize, but there's definitely a cadential progression going on here, so I don't want to omit it. But we start things off in the key of B major. This entire phrase is pretty much in the key of B major, so we're going to say, actually no, it's going to break one of my rules that I've made for myself as far as modulations are concerned. We get another B major chord. We have B, D sharp, F sharp, and B, so it's redundant. We don't need to reanalyze it in the key of E, but in the key of B major, it's also our tonic triad. We then have A sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and C sharp. That's F sharp major over A sharp, which is 5/6. And then we get G sharp, F sharp, A sharp, and D sharp, which I reckon this G sharp's an accented non-chord tone, and it's actually this F sharp that is our chord tone, leaving us with D sharp minor. That would be a 3/6 chord. So we have 5 going to 3 here. We saw this progression earlier as well in secondary terms, but still 5 going to 3, kind of unusual. But afterwards we have G sharp, B, B, and E, some adjacent harmony here. This is E major over G sharp, not 1/6, but 4/6, remember, because we're in the key of B major. And then we have some passing tones going on in the lower voices, as well as an anticipation in the alto here. We have A, C sharp, F sharp, and E. This is a passing F sharp 7 chord, which is 5/6/5 over A sharp. And it's interesting because when we have a 4/6 chord, we always have this ascent. Well, sorry, let me run that back real quick. When we have 4/6 and it's an ascending pattern connecting 4/6 to 1 in root position, B, D sharp, F sharp, and D sharp. We always have this tone connecting G sharp and B, or 6 and 1, and sometimes Bach moves other voices to fully spell out a 7 chord usually, but sometimes we get 5. 5 and 7 function the same way, so the fact that we're seeing 5 here, it's not unprecedented. We've seen 5 in this situation as well, but it's more likely for us to see a 7 chord, at least from the chorales that I've looked at so far. But after this we have anticipations in 3 of the voices, and I know it looks like 3 of the voices are moving, but because all of them are anticipations, it really just feels like we're getting the same chord 1 beat or 1/2 beat even early, so I'm not going to analyze it because we're just going to get the analysis on the next beat. We have E, E, G sharp, and C sharp, which is C sharp minor in first inversion. That's a 2/6 chord. Bach loves 2/6 chords. And then we have F sharp, C sharp, A sharp, and C sharp, which is our good old 5 chord, F sharp major. And then we have this faux sort of quasi-cadence here on B major, B, D sharp, F sharp, and B. 2 cadences where we cadence on a B major chord, 2 different contexts. And if we look ahead towards our next phrase, we have another half cadence in the key of E major, so we do get another cadence on a B major chord, but I think this B major chord is actually going to be a turnaround back into the key of E major, both for the repeat and the next section, so I am going to call it our 5 chord. So we start the phrase off with E major, E, E, G sharp, and B, which is our tonic triad in root position, so the 5 does resolve where we would expect it to go. We also have a passing tone in the bass, more specifically a passing 7th, and we are still analyzing in the key of E major, all diatonic chords here. We have C sharp, G sharp, C sharp, and E. That's C sharp minor, which is a 6th chord. As far as thirds progressions are concerned, that is chords that are a third apart. Probably 1 going to 6 is the most common, and I would even go as far to say a normative progression. We even see this progression in today's music quite frequently, but we also see, 5 go to 3 or vice versa in cases as well, 4 go to 2. Usually descending thirds progressions are more common, I would say, even though 3 going to 5 we see with some regularity. I didn't mean to suggest that that was happening there. I just pointed out a 3 chord that I saw. But yeah, thirds progressions are particularly interesting because both the chords in question that are part of the chord progression are they share more notes in common than they don't, which is kind of an interesting commentary on the progression, because if you have the majority of the same notes between the two chords, well, how much of a progression is really happening if only one new note is getting introduced? I don't know. Objectively, I think they're the weakest progressions, but that doesn't mean that they're any less beautiful. It just means that objectively they don't introduce any more notes to the texture. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, just an observation. There's like a universal truth about theory. But after our 6th chord, we get some transitive harmony. We have G sharp, B, and D sharp. That's a G sharp minor triad in root position, 6 going to 3. 3 typically wants to go to 6 via the cycle of falling fifths, but we see the inverse of that, the cycle of ascending fifths, pretty much just as frequently now. So I don't know if I'm going to keep commenting on transitive harmony, but it is something that has subverted my expectations about Bach. The fact that this started off as an interesting pattern that triggered like an alarm off in my brain, like this is something you need to take note of, but it's now become such like a commonplace thing for Bach to do, or something to be found in the chorales, that I don't even know if it's worth mentioning anymore. But I'll still point it out because it's something that I feel goes against what the general practice or suggested practice of the time is, according to the textbook. We do have an anticipation here in the melody as well before we get A, G sharp, B, and C sharp. I think we have 2 accented non-chord tones here in the inner voices, this G sharp and this B, which leave us with A, F sharp, A, and C sharp, which is F sharp minor in sorry, I just lost my train of thought. F sharp minor in first inversion. That is our 2 chord in first inversion. So we have 3 going to 2, 6 here. And if you see a chord in root position or in first inversion next to a chord that is a diatonic step below with a that's in first inversion, you might be able to hedge your bets on what the next chord is going to be, and you would be correct. We have this pattern here that Bach typically does with 7 chords and 1 chord, so 1, 7, 1 is a pretty common one. 4, 3, 4 is another common one as well, but here we're seeing 3, 2, 3, B, F sharp, A, and B. However, this A is an accented non-chord tone, and this F sharp is also an accented non-chord tone. We actually have B, D, G sharp, and B, D sharp, G sharp, and B, which is a G sharp minor triad in first inversion, or 3, 6. So we have another interesting pattern like this, another permutation that rings true about that pattern in the chorales, which is pretty cool. We then have C sharp, E, G sharp, and A. This is, even though we have sort of I guess it's not even really a suspension, because C sharp and G sharp spell a fifth, so it looks like a suspension, but it's not. So I'm going to look to this downbeat for chord tones, and that would make this an A major 7 chord over C sharp, or 4, 6, 5. And we have an anticipation in the tenor and 2 passing tones, 1 in the alto and 1 in the bass, which leaves us with D sharp, B, F sharp, and A, which is another 6-5 chord. This is 5-6-5. That's B7 over D sharp. So some adjacent harmony, but also 4 going to 5. We saw this earlier, this exact same progression well, exact same. I guess that's the millennial use of exact. It's not literally the exact same, but for all intents and purposes, they're so they have much more in common than they don't. We have another 4/6 to 1 connecting progression where we have a chord here that actually emerges out of the passing tones or the non-chord tones that happen on the and of 1, bridging 4, 6, 5, and 1, E, B, E, and G sharp, which is our tonic triad. And we have another anticipation here before we get B major, which is our 5 chord. So we're going to start off our fourth and most interesting phrase with some interesting chromaticism. As we know, when there is chromaticism in the bass especially, but long lines where there are chromatic half steps that continue in one direction, you know there's going to be an interesting chord progression, and I think we have some mode mixture going on here. We have B, G sharp, D, and B, and this is a G sharp diminished triad in first inversion. I think we're going to just stay in the key of E for this, but we're going to be thinking in terms of E minor. So this is tonicizing 4. This would be 7/6 of 4, and in the key of E we would expect a 4 chord, so I use uppercase. I could use lowercase to foreshadow what's going to happen next, but I don't think that ultimately at this point we know. But you know, whether it's uppercase or whether it's lowercase, that's entirely up to you. They both articulate the same thing because the chords are the same, so both analyses are correct. This F sharp's a passing tone as well. We then get C, E, C, and A. The C naturals are very interesting. They're flat sixes in the key of E. The melody and the alto also really sound like F sharp minor, so the fact that we have E going on in the bass and in the tenor, and the fact that we have the idea of F sharp minor being echoed in the alto but mainly highlighted by the melody is very unusual, has some Ivesian vibes to it. But that being said, this is a minor 4 chord 4/6. This is A minor in first inversion, and then we get a pair of chords which is particularly unusual. We have C sharp, E sharp, B, and G sharp. Now in the key of E major, this C sharp 7 chord is a secondary dominant. This is 5/7 of 2, because C sharp is the dominant of F sharp, and F sharp in the key of E is our 2 chord. So we've had 2 secondary dominant chords here, being I guess we have this pattern of secondary dominant, chord that it's tonicizing, secondary dominant, and then here we're going to go against the grain and get a secondary deceptive progression quite similar to the one that we had at the beginning of our chorale here. We have D natural, F sharp, A, and F sharp. That's a D chord. Now in the key of E, that would be like a 7 chord. So it would be like our flat 7, and kind of have to be liberal with these chord progressions and these analyses and how you approach these ascending, I say ascending, but it could be descending as well, these chromatic bass lines, because the chord progressions we're going to get are typically not normative. When we see 3 ascending notes together, that's when they can be the most normative, but when we see 4+ notes in a series, we're going to get a chord progression that is fitting the best it can. It's more like trying to do the job while also experimenting. I bet that this is akin to what, experimental music was in Bach's time. It had a very unusual sound. It still has a very unusual sound. We have an expectation of what the music's going to sound like, and this is not it. This is some wacky chromaticism that does not really compute easily. But an easier way to look at this chord progression, in the same way that this looks like a 5/3 progression in the key of A, in the key of F sharp minor, this looks like 5/7 going to 6. So this is a true secondary deceptive progression, and that's the best way that I could look at it. It is a secondary deceptive progression, and it is also continuing in the key of E. I think both of those outlooks are accurate takes on what's going on over the course of these 2 beats, but it's probably the most interesting, maybe in contention with this mode mixture here on beat 1. It's very interesting. But that being said, we move to more of a sense of normalcy here. We have some passing tones in the upper voices, and we do get like a passing G7 chord here with the F sharp or a G major 7 in second inversion, but I don't really think it's actually, yeah, you know what? We could put like a 3-4-3 chord here. 7 does want to go to 3, so that's totally fine. I don't know how strong this analysis is, but the chord is there if we take the aggregate of all of the notes that are occurring at the time that they're introduced, or the notes in the upper voices are introduced. But we go to another chromatic chord here. We have D sharp, or it seems chromatic. It actually is. We have C natural here, but it's another chord being borrowed from the parallel minor. We have 7 fully diminished, so it's not a secondary dominant. Sorry if I said it was. I forgot if I already did. I'll just chalk that up to the pneumonia. But this is a fully diminished 7th chord because we're borrowing that C natural from E minor rather than using the C sharp that's diatonic to E major. And then we go to our E major chord, E, G sharp, B, and G sharp, which is our tonic triad. So light at the end of the tunnel, lots of mode mixture, lots of chordal borrowing, lots of secondary dominance and some unusual resolutions, but regardless, we get somewhere. This A is a non-chord tone, this E is a chord tone for now, but it turns into a 4-3 suspension over the bass on the next beat, leaving us with B, B, E, and F sharp. The D sharp is actually our chord tone here, so this E is a 4-3 suspension. And then our perfect authentic cadence at the end of the chorale ends with 1, E, G sharp, B, and E, which is our tonic triad and root position. And that's going to be today's analysis. Definitely an unusual chorale. This last progression, very fascinating. Again, when it comes to these chromatic bass lines and progressions that are a byproduct of half-step chromatic motion in really any of the voices, but the bass in particular, you're going to get an unusual progression, and you have to ask yourself, or you don't really need to ask yourself anything. You need to tell yourself that what you might think about chords, or the relationship that you already have with harmony, might have to take a back seat, at least for the time being, and you'll have to just sort of analyze objectively what's going on the page, because Bach used this and created honestly something that was surprisingly functionally harmonic, which is pretty neat. Pretty inspiring. But that's going to be today's analysis. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you're interested in following me along on this journey to analyze all of Bach's chorale harmonizations, feel free to subscribe to the channel. You can hit the notification icon as well if you are interested in getting a daily notification of when my video goes live. I'd love to have you along on the journey. And also, if you'd like to like the video, if you enjoyed the content, I would really appreciate it. But with all of that being said, thank you so much for watching the video and supporting the channel by doing so. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.